So here we go, and I want this to kind of be driven by you guys, but if you don't have questions specifically, I'm gonna walk through some quick examples, and then we're gonna work on the two labs. So um, so ask me questions. What kind of questions do you guys have? All right. So I'm going to jump in. All right. So yesterday I actually did basically a quick lab, and I put that in the link. So this is a lab example, and so let's go look at that one, um, and that's here. And I'm going to also take a look at this link here, which is this chapter on Python lists. So I'm going to do this much faster than I did it yesterday, but I'm going to walk through some information here on lists and how lists work. Um, so a list in Python is just a specific construct. It basically is, if you've heard of the concept um, of arrays, this is just an array. And you define a list by putting a square bracket around a list of things. And so in this case, I have a list of numbers, right? In this case, I have a list of strings, right? And so numbers, I don't have to put parentheses around them. I just define them as numbers, and Python sees that as a list of integers, right? It could be a list of floats if I put decimal points in there. And then lists of strings, they basically have quotes, right? So I'll quote something, and then I'll quote something, and I'll quote something. So now I have three different strings here. Even though this is two words, it's still just one string. Now you'll notice that how I define the stuff in my list is I put a comma. So a comma will separate all the items in the list. So in this list, there are 4 items, 10, 20, 30, 40. And here you have 3 strings, Crunchy Frog, Rambladder, and Lark Vomit. I have no idea where those came from, although I think that they probably are references from Monty Python. Um, but anyway, and the other thing you want to remember is that when we index these lists, right, this 10, right, or this Crunchy Frog are the 0th element, right? We start at 0. So when we're counting the index of where an item is located in that list. We start at 0. So this would be 0, this would be 1, this would be 2. So when we asked for the length of this list, we would get the number 3. But if we wanted to look at the 3rd element of the list, we would index it to be number 2. All right, and we'll see that when we look at this example here. So now the other thing is you can mix stuff inside these lists. All right, it doesn't have to be all numbers or all strings, right? In this case, I've got, the 0th element is spam. The second, or the ones element is a floating point 2, then a 5, and then actually I have another list inside a list, right? And you can do that. You can put lists inside lists. They can do that kind of stuff. All right, lists are mutable. What does that mean? That means that we're able to actually change the values of these lists. And so the elements inside the list, we can change those. And so, for example, if I had a list called numbers, and it was 2 numbers here, 17 and 123, if I later said numbers index 1 equals 5, then that's actually changing this number here. So that when I print numbers, I get 17, which was the 0th element, and I get 5, which was the ones element. And so I'm actually able to change it. All right, and so if I looked at that code, right, I could do a couple of things. Right, so here I have a variable that I'm naming x, and I'm making it equal to 34. I've got another variable that I'm naming y, and I'm making it equal to Bob. All right, and then I can create a variable called list, my list var, right? I'm just my list variable, and in there I'm actually saying, okay, here's my square brackets to bracket my thing up. I'm going to say the first thing is some string, the next is a number 99, the next is this variable x, which happens to be 34, and the next is this variable y, which happens to be Bob, right? And so if I say, let's do this, make this a little cleaner so we can see everything going on. I'm going to print my list var1, and then I'm going to do this. I'm going to say print quote and lines, and that way we'll be able to see between these prints. Man, I hate this interface. It's hard to select stuff. All right. The only reason I'm doing this is to make it so it's easier to read when all this stuff runs, because we're doing a bunch of stuff here. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at this first thing that gets printed out, which is print my list var, right? So what would you expect? Well, you're going to see that it's going to print this string. But where I have x, it's going to give us the value of x, and where I have y, it's going to give us the value of y, right? So when I run this, you'll see that this first string got printed, right? And that string was, or this first list got printed, and it had a string, a number, another number, and another string, right? And so you can see that it just prints the list out with the square brackets on each side. Now I have another one, another list var here, right? My list var 1, which is a name, another string, and some number, right? And so when that printed, it printed out that that list as well. And again, right, it doesn't have to be single words or just all numbers or whatever. It can be mixed, right? Now, in this case here, right, I am printing not just the whole list var1, but I'm printing this twos element. All right. So if we start at 0, this would be 0, this would be 1, this would be 2. And so in this case, I am printing out just the element that I want, that twos element, which is the third element of that list, right? And so I can actually, do stuff and print stuff out. I could actually have done an if this element had something in there. So if for example, well, let me finish this up here first. And then you can see that it's mutable, right? So if I said, hey, I'm going to change this email address because I don't like the one that's in there, I'm going to say this email address equals list var1 element 2, which I just printed out right here. So I just printed it out right here. But now when I print that whole list var out again, you can see that that email got changed. So that element of the list got changed. And so you can like rewrite and change those elements. All right, so the last thing I want to show you real quick here is that I can do some interesting stuff. So I have this new list here called T, and I've got a string, and here I'm using the element, the variable x, but I'm also using the string function to convert it from an x, from an integer to a string. All right, and why do you think I need to do that? If I'm going to sort something, right? So here I'm using the sort method down here, and I'm saying take the string t and sort it. All right, and when you sort something, it actually has to all be the same type. So it has to all be strings, right? If I didn't have this be a string, right? If I just had it be the variable x, I could slice the string up, right? I could say, hey, just print the elements 1 through 4. And when you do these elements like this, when you're splitting out what you want, it starts at the one you're starting with, but it's the last one minus 1. So instead of printing 4, the fourth the fours element, it only goes 1, 2, 3. So if I look over here and I have this structure, this string, and I print it out, it starts out here and it goes. Oh, let me rerun this because I changed it from a. Oh yeah, okay. So it's getting an error, but it's lower down. So basically, I'm I'm starting out here. This is the ones element, right? So this string is 0, and this is the first element, which is 34, right? So it shows me getting 34 here, then cat, then door is open, but it doesn't get the fourth element. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So it didn't print out the fourth element because it always does the up to but not including this last element, right? You can also specify, hey, to the end by doing a -1, and it goes, oh, I know you're actually saying it's the end, all right? But then again, it's not the last one, it's the last one -1. And so when we do this, we're going to start at 3, so that's 0, 1, 2, 3. So I print the door is open, E, right, F, because that's this element, and then Y, we don't see that because that's the last one -1, right? All right. Now you can also add stuff to it. There's a method called append, and so append with whatever you stick inside of this these parentheses. So I'm sticking a string in there. I'm basically saying take this string and append it to the end of T. All right. So then when I do that, then I have the whole string, the whole list of T, plus it appended on this one. So you can actually add stuff to these lists. All right. So now we're getting a traceback error, right? And our traceback error is basically telling us that it says you can't sort. So this is like the sort thing. No, not supporting between integers and strings. And so basically saying, hey, you can try and sort this list, but because it's a mixed list, that doesn't work. And so what I did was I said, well, instead of taking the number 34 and putting it in here, I'm going to do a string conversion, and I'm going to convert the number 34 into the string 34. So now when I run this, it works fine, and you'll notice that that this 34 now is a string. It's turned it into quotes around it, so it's a string. It's not the actual number 34, it's the string 34, right? And there's a difference because you can't do math on strings, but you can sort strings like this, right? And so now what I did was I printed it out. T after I appended, and then I sorted it. And so you'll see that I sorted this list. So now everything is in alphabetical order from an ASCII table point of view. Numbers are first in the ASCII table, then uppercase letters are first, and then lowercase letters. And that's why cat is showing up ahead of, you know, Ughi and Bob, right? If we came in here and we changed this to a lowercase c and then ran it, you would notice that cat would be then after Bob, right? And so it's sorting it based on the order in the ASCII table. And it sorts it basically, it's just this big kind of bubble sort where what it does is it says, hey, I'm going to look at the first character of this string, and I'm going to look at the first character of all the other strings, and I'm going to put them in order, right? And if that's the order, then that's what it does. If you had, you know, something where you had, you know, A, B, and A, right? It would sit there and it would sort all those out. It would say, okay, let me sort the first character, then let me sort the second character, third character, and it would just bring all those things in order. All right. So that's the quick and dirty version of what I wanted to talk to you about. Let me look at this document again for just some other things that you might want to be looking at. So there's this in operator, right? And so you might have a string, a variable that is a string, and then you're basically asking a question. You're saying, is this string Edom in this list cheese? And what it does is says, oh, you got a string here and you got a list, and I'm going to go look at that list and I'm going to see if this string is in there. And if it is, then I'm going to return value true. Now, if you were doing this in code, right, you would you know, do something like let's go with if, and let's change this to T, and let's change this to cat, and it says if cat is in T, then print we have cats, right? Oops, need to put that in quotes. And so I can actually use this operator here to say, to ask that question, and if it is, I can do something, right? So when I run that, it's not in there, right? Because we changed it so it was a lowercase cat, and so that exact string is not in there. But if we change it back to capital and then run it, then it finds it. Right, so that's just a way to be able to look at something and look and say, hey, is there something inside? Is this thing inside this list? What else did I want to show you here? Right, this shows you how you can slice lists up. So I showed you the append method where you can actually add things to a list, and you don't have to have a complete full list to be able to add stuff to it. You can create just a blank list, right? To create a blank list, you would do something like this, right? You can create a variable and you say equal, and then just give it square brackets. Empty. It's an empty list, right? But what it's telling the interpreter, the Python interpreter, is, hey, this variable called empty, or this variable called whatever you call it, equals blank, square brackets with nothing inside of it. That just means that it's a blank list that you may be adding stuff to later. So then you could later append stuff to your empty list. And so that's one way where you're looking at one list and you're pulling stuff off of that list and sticking it on another list. That's one way to do that, where you say, oh, I found the thing I wanted. Let me pull it off this list and append it to this other list. Right? And so you might use append. Extend is kind of like adding two lists together. And it basically just says, hey, take this list 1, T1, which is this list, and just stick this list onto the end of it. So it's kind of like appending, but you're just basically extending lists. You're just making it bigger. And the reason it's called extend is probably more to do with the fact that it has to do with the memory that it's allocating. It's saying, hey, take this list, and we already know it's this big. We'll now just extend this list and make it bigger and stick this other stuff onto it, right? And it's just giving it more memory space in the thing. So then when you reprint, T1, it's not just that part of the list, but it's this list as well added to it. So you didn't change T2, but you did change T1 when you use the extend method, right? And methods, again, are, whatever you're doing the method against, dot, and then the name of the method, parentheses, and if it has parameters, you'll pass the parameters. So this is the pop method, right? And this is where you're saying, pop this thing off, take this out, take it out of the list, right? And so you could look at this list and you could say T equals, A, B, C, and then you could say X, which is a new list, is the list T, but I'm going to pop element 1 off of this, right? And so you say print T, and it shows you that you've basically cut that element out of the list, and now it's no longer in the list. But you did take that element when you popped it and made it equal to X, that you actually did it. So are you able to pop more than one element? I think that you can. You would need to probably do square brackets, and you did square brackets, kind of like when we. All right, now let's see if that works. No, still don't like. Okay, so it doesn't seem to like that. So maybe you can't pop more than one element. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the blog, and now's your chance to ask me questions. All right, it's 9 o'clock. We got 30 minutes if you want. If you have questions, you can stick around. If you don't have questions, you can drop off. If you find you have more questions this afternoon, you can get back on at 1 o'clock, and that session will be just answering questions. So, anybody have questions?